if we record. Great, welcome everyone and happy July. I hope wherever you are, you're enjoying the warmth. And today we have Dr. Kathryn Pollak from the PCRC co-chair presenting a how to prepare a fundable grant application. Just a couple of housekeeping items. Attendees are muted and video cannot be turned on. We do wish that you engage with us using the chat or the Q&A button, which is a button at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar. And along with Dr. Pollak, we have Dr. Christine Ritchie, also co-chair of PCRC. So I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Ritchie and have her formally introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Naomi, and welcome everyone. We're so glad that you're here with us on this day in July and the summer of 2022. And we are particularly delighted to have speak to you today, Dr. Kathryn Pollak, who is a social psychologist and a professor in population health sciences at Duke University. She's also the associate director of she co-chairs a palliative care research cooperative group, and she has been developing behavioral interventions for close to 20 years. And they've just run the gamut of important behavioral interventions that include things around smoking cessation, helping patients and clinicians communicate better with each other, and has done a great job in particular focusing on clinician-patient communication and oncologists, palliative care clinicians, and primary care clinicians. And she has served as a communication coach for the past 7 years and has coached over 100 clinicians and is currently training 3 other communication coaches. She also has been very well funded by the National Institutes of Health and really teaches all of us wonderful ways to create a thoughtful, fundable, well-reasoned grant application. So we're really delighted to have her present to you today. Kathryn?
Thank you, Christine. I really appreciate it. And thanks to everybody for joining me on a balmy summer day. I have been writing grants for probably, I think, 25 years. And there really is a formula. And I'm here to kind of talk to you about the formula and hope that it improves the success of your grants. Just as an overview, I'm going to talk about the different phases of starting your grant writing application and then submitting it. So in phase 1, we're going to talk about the ideas and the fit. In phase 2, we're going to talk about your team. In phase 3, we're going to talk about the fact that you're actually writing it. In phase 4, assembling all the parts, because there are a lot of things that have to go into your grant application besides the science. And then phase 5 is the finishing touches. So idea and fit. So you're sitting there thinking, okay, I need to get funded. What should I do? You need to come up with ideas. We researchers are known for our creativity. And so coming up with a great idea is the first step. How do you do that? You can read the literature. I think that's a very good place to start. I tend to also, I do read the introduction because that sets up the problem that they're addressing. The discussion section really gives the leads for the next projects that need to be done. And so that's a really good section to focus on in terms of what would the next steps in the research be. Attending conferences is a great way to come up with new ideas. As you listen to other people's science, you're like, that's an interesting idea. I wonder if they've ever done this. Going to webinars is a great way also to come up with great ideas. And then I am a community engaged researcher. And so what that means is I don't always rely on myself to come up with the good ideas. I ask the community what they think are the significant problems that I need to address or the good ideas I should be researching, because many times I work with the community. So if I come up with an idea, but then I go to the community and try to do something and they don't think it's a good idea, that's not going to work. So talking to the community is a really good way to come up with good research questions that are going to be more implementable and more impactful to your community. So you have this great idea. So what do you do next? You got to come up with a research question. I know that sounds silly. You're like, of course, it is harder than it sounds. And I will say that I have met with folks who've been doing research a long time who don't have well-formed research questions. So when I am writing any paper, any grant, in the significance section, I think about 4 things that I need to address. And again, I wish somebody had told me this formula. I think it's pretty straightforward. First, you need to say, what is the problem? What is the problem you're trying to address? You need to make it, you need to make sure that you're addressing a problem that needs to be addressed and that it is significant and will have an impact. Then you need to cover what has been done about the problem. What have others done? Unless new, like COVID-19 could have been, although there's still some research behind that, that about other, infectious diseases. But what's been done about the problem is your next step. Then once you've reviewed that literature, then what are the gaps in what's been done? Because you wouldn't be writing a grant if there wasn't a gap there or a problem with what's been done that's kind of propelling you to ask a different question. And then finally, how are you filling the gaps? So you're really basically saying, here's a problem we have to address. Some people have done some things about it, but you know what? They haven't done this, and that's a real issue. And that's why I'm writing this grant, is to fill that. And that can help you solidify what your research question is. When you go through those 4 steps, then you know what you're asking. And so I think that that's a really good exercise to go through with every paper and every grant you write. So then you've got your idea, and now you need to write your aims page. So your aims page is the first page of your grant. It doesn't count in your page number. So if you're writing an R21, it's 6 pages plus your specific aims page. If it's an R1, it's 12 pages plus your aims page. Your aims page is like a mini version of your grant. And so writing the aims page really helps you think about your entire project, because you have a little section that goes over significance. In that, you're talking about innovation. We're going to talk about these different sections. You're going to talk about your study design and what you're going to do, and then come your aims. Back in the day, and I've been doing this a long time, I think that more complicated grants got funded where you had 4 or 5 aims. I feel like there is a trend towards simplicity. And I think that it's more 2 to 3 aims are more favorably reviewed than something that has 4 or 5 aims, because they might come back and say it's overambitious what you're trying to do. Your aims need to be independent. What I mean by that is that aim 2 cannot depend on aim 1. So you can't say, I'm going to look at this in aim 1 and then whatever I find in aim 1 is going to lead to how I'm going to construct aim 2. They will ding you for having dependent aims. So your aims need to stand alone on their own and not be dependent on each other. So you come up with a great specific aims page. It's nice and punchy. You have really nice succinct aims, many times with hypotheses under them. I usually like to start my aims with a verb, like examine this or test this. And then I send it off to program officers, because I have never written a grant in which I did not talk to a program officer. It is their job to help guide you. It is their job also to fill their portfolio with interesting work. And so they are there to help you and to be of service to you. And so I also want to see what is the right institutes. So palliative care is one of the great fields that cuts across different institutes. So, and those institutes have different pay lines and they have different priorities. And so the other reason that I talk to program officers to get their input, because they're smart people and they're scientists and they can help me shape my study. They also are really key, because they're going to let you know, like, I already have 4 grants that are covering advanced care directives. So, or advanced care planning. So I don't think we're going to fund another one of these right now. And you're like, oh, that's good to know, because even if you got a great score, they might not fund it. And most of the institutes actually don't have what we call hard pay lines, meaning if you get a certain score and a certain percentile, really the percentile is what they go by, you're going to get funded. Most of the institutes do not say, you know, if you get this percentile, you will get funded. They have a more fluid pay line. And what that means is even if you get a great score and a great percentile, if they are not interested in your work, or they have too many grants that are already addressing what you're addressing, they might not fund you. And that has happened to colleagues of mine. And so you want to make sure that the institute is correct. The program officer likes your idea, has had some input if possible. And the reason it's important to engage this program officer is not just to make your grant better, but if your grant does get a borderline score, like it's good, but it didn't quite hit the home run you wanted to, your program officer may argue to fund it under exception, meaning they have to advocate for your grant. Of all the grants in their portfolio, they have to go to council and say, this is the one I want you to fund. Now, if you have a relationship with this program officer, they're going to be more likely to do that for you than if you just send it in without talking to them. So it's really, I would say, an essential step in submitting any grant. And then you want to pick your study section. The study sections have changed. So the ones that I was more used to, a lot of them don't exist anymore. The ones I used to sit on don't exist anymore. And so you can just go to csr.nih.gov, and it will help you pick your study section. There's something called the assisted referral tool. It's very much like if for those of you who know the website Jane, that helps you pick the journals for your articles. This is one that helps you pick your study section, and it will list all of the study sections. You also can just look at them all by yourself, and it lists them all. You can click on each study section and it tells you the kinds of things that study section reviews, the types of projects. And then really cool, you can look at who's on the study section. Now it will tell you who are the standing members and who are ad hoc members, but you want to make sure that the study section has the expertise that you are looking for. I will say, do not make the error that I made in my first grant submission, where I was talking to the scientific review officer. Now, the program officer is on the program side and is helping you pre-award. Once you submit your grant, your contact at NIH is your scientific review officer. That is the person that is running the study section. The program officer and the scientific review officer do not talk to each other, because that is seen as a conflict. Because remember, this program official has a vested interest in getting his or her grants funded, and the scientific review officer is just trying to provide a good review of all the applications. So I talked to the scientific review officer, the one who's running the study section, and said, I think this is a great study section because this person's on it and this person's on it. And once I said their names, those people were automatically in conflict and were not allowed to review my grant. And I did not know that. And so you can say to the scientific review officer, if you think that this is a good study section, I think that that your study section has the expertise needed to review my application, but do not name anybody's name, because once you do, they are automatically in conflict and cannot review. They will have to actually step out of the room or step out of the Zoom room when your application is being reviewed. So you might not actually have the expertise reviewing your grant like you had hoped. So don't make the mistake I did, please. All right, so you've got your aims page, you've talked to your program officer, you're like, yes, this is a good idea. They're on board. I've got the right study section. I've got the right institute. Okay, now who am I going to do this with? So that's phase 2. Who's your team? I would recommend you pick people you like. And I know that sounds silly, but I should have backed up. Also pick an idea you like, because this is going to be 2 to 6 years of your life. And so if you're studying something that you're not that excited about, it's going to be a drag. So make sure you're really excited about what you're doing. And on a similar note, make sure you like the people with whom you're working. There are really smart people whose personalities don't match yours. If you think that it will be a more challenging working relationship, I would argue that you should not put in the grant with that person, because again, we're talking about 2 to 6 years working with that person. So pick the people you like. If you are doing community engaged research, which I highly recommend you do, make sure you have a good community partner that you've been working with hopefully helping develop what your research question is, helping design your study, thinking about recruitment, thinking about how you're going to conduct the study, how you're going to disseminate the findings. So your community partner is really like a co-investigator. Make sure you budget for your community partner. They're not just like a person that is a consultant that doesn't seem to play a very big role, because you might get dinged for that in more ways than one. Pick people on your team who will actually do the work. It's great to have people who have fantastic names and are, have a lot of prestige in the field. But if they're not actually going to review your grant, that's going to be obvious, because I have actually done this before, where I asked somebody who is really prominent in a certain area, in an area that I did not have expertise, but they didn't read the grant carefully. And so when it got reviewed, I was criticized on the parts that I don't have expertise, and they clearly knew that that person hadn't done a good review. And so pick people that you think are really going to put in the work to make the grant application as strong as possible. In terms of what I mean by expertise box checking, so whatever you are proposing to do, make sure that whatever you say you're going to do, you have people on your team who have experience doing it. And so if you are doing qualitative data analysis, make sure somebody on your team on their biosketch talks about their expertise in qualitative data analysis. If you're doing something with some, statistical analyses that are complex, or every grant needs a PhD statistician anyways, but if you're doing like an implementation science project, make sure you have somebody who has that expertise, because that will come back when they're looking at your team, like, oh, this is a great project, but you don't really have the right team who can conduct it or give me the confidence that you can do it well. And the other thing that can be problematic is having teams that are too big or teams that have overlapping expertise. So if you have people who do a lot of the same kinds of things, it may be a team that's worked together a long time, but when the reviewers look, they're going to say, well, what are their unique contributions? Why do you need both of them? Because of course they're looking at the budget too. The budget doesn't go into the score, but it is still a factor. It's definitely a factor for funding. So you do not want your co-investigators or your multiple PIs to have overlapping expertise, because you will get critiqued for that. All right, so you have your great idea, your aims page. Now you have your team assembled. That's fantastic. Now it's time to write. And how we're going to talk a little bit about how to construct this in a way that makes it the most sellable product you can have. It's funny, my dad wanted me to be an engineer, but then also said that he thinks I should be in sales. And what I said to him is, Dad, I am in sales. I sell my research ideas to funders. I sell my research studies to clinics and patients. And so I do sell. You are in the job of persuasive writing. So that is a really big part of your job, is writing persuasively. And I didn't really wrap my head around that in the beginning of my career, but I fully understand that when I'm writing any paper, any grant, I am writing it to persuade. And so think about your reviewers. They are tired, they're overloaded. They are adding these grant reviews on top of the many other things that they do. And they often are doing it they're not doing it at their peak hours. They're doing it, on the weekends, in the evenings, and they're tired. So when you're writing a grant, think about a fatigued reviewer and how you can make it as easy for your fatigued reviewer as possible. Funding is really tight. It is not easy to get a grant these days. And when I'm saying that, when I first came to Duke in 1998, the funding pay line for the National Cancer Institute was 24%, meaning if your grant was in the top 24%, you got funded, and now it's 11 or 12. And so it's a lot more competitive to get funded. So again, you really want to put in the best grants you can, because a lot of people are competing for those dollars. The grant application reflects you as a scientist. So when it is the only thing that the reviewer sees, and it is a representation of you. So whatever you're putting down and the way that you're doing it is going to make them think about what kind of scientist you are. So it's really important that you make a good impression. And the application is more than science. Like I was saying, it is persuasive writing. It's not just scientific writing, it's persuasive writing. So the phase, or the different sections of a grant, are significance, innovation, investigators, approach, and environment. And there's an impact score that they will give you. They rate you on each of these criteria, and then they give an overall impact score that should be driven mostly by significance and innovation. A lot of reviewers are still hung up on approach. They'll kind of nitpick your design or your measures or your analysis, which is certainly important. The approach is certainly important. They are supposed to be weighing more heavily whether or not you're addressing a significant area and whether you're pushing the field. But of course, if you're proposing something that is really infeasible or you're not asking, or you didn't design the study in a way that's going to answer your question, that's obviously going to hurt you. But these are the criteria, and we're going to go over each of them. So in your significance section, I do not think this has to be a lengthy section of your grant. You do need to do a comprehensive lit review. Make sure that you cite all of the relevant literature, especially if you know that somebody on the study section is prominent in your field. Make sure you are citing their work. I know that sounds like ego stroking, and that is exactly what it is, because if they look and you haven't cited their work, that might not go over as well. But most importantly is making sure that you are bringing in all the relevant literature, because again, remember that this grant application speaks to you as a scientist. So if you are not doing a comprehensive lit review, they are going to wonder about how thorough you are, how prepared you are, whether or not you're hardworking. So they ascribe all of these traits based on how you've written your grant. So make sure you do a really good lit review. And remember in that, what's the problem? What's been done about the problem? That's where the lit review comes in. Make sure you have a really tight argument for your grant so that the argument is flowing. And the way that I know this is I read the first line of every paragraph. And that argument should flow from those first sentences where the paragraphs just kind of fill in those topic sentences. I also end my paragraphs with a line at the end that is the nice segue to the next section. And I'll show you an example or what it looks like. But if you just read the first line of each of those paragraphs, your argument should be really tight and follow each other in a logical way. If you're writing an R1, they're going to want pilot data. They didn't used to, but this is a requirement now. You have to basically do a mini version of your study before you do the study to show them that it's feasible and has a signal for being successful. And if you're addressing disparities, I would be explicit about that. And what I mean by that is, disparities is certainly a hot topic right now. And a lot of folks will just say, oh yeah, this is a disparities issue, but they won't really make a strong case for why they're doing the grant that they're doing. And you will get in trouble for that. So for example, I remember somebody was doing a grant to look at the fact that cervical cancer screening was less common among Latinx women. And they claimed, it was due to modesta. And, the argument, that was basically their main point. And I was like, I don't know a lot of women who aren't modest about having cervical cancer screening. So just because the population has something, that's not enough to make the whole grant about disparities. You really have to make a strong argument for why you are addressing disparities and what the disparity is and how you're trying to address it. Because if you do it in a superficial way, it can really backfire and the reviewers will critique you. All right, so then they're going to look at your investigators. If you're an early stage investigator, use that power, because what happens when you're an early stage investigator is you get reviewed with all the early stage investigators, and you get a bump in your pay line. So that first grant, that first R1 that you get a little bit of a cushion because you're new and you don't know what you're doing, and that's fantastic. Now, if you're going in as a multiple principal investigator and you have not been funded as an R1, I would recommend you do not partner with somebody who has been funded with an R1, because you lose your early investigator status if your multiple PI has been funded. So you only get to do it once, and you get that special review with those other early stage investigators where people are supposed to be a little kinder, and then you get the bump in the pay line. So it's a great time. It's a great way to get the grace that you need when you don't know what you're doing yet. Make sure all your bases are covered. Again, making sure all the expertise is covered, minimize your overlap, highlight highlight how you've been working together. You can also be critiqued if you've brought together a motley crew of people who have never worked together, because if they're thinking about you doing a grant or a project for 5 years and you have no track record of working together, they will have less confidence that you can actually do the project well than if you have at least a couple papers together that says, hey, we know each other, we like each other, we can do this, we're productive. So if you can show some collaboration, you will do better than if you all have just, this is a new collaboration. And I highly recommend using your budget justification space and your biosketch space to talk about these things. The reason is there's no page limit on your budget justification. So in my budget justification, I have a paragraph at the top that talks about my team, how long they've been working together, how many papers they've published together, how many projects they've done together, and none of that counts in your page limit, but they're still reading it because the budget justification is a really important part of your grant. It tells them who's doing what and how much effort they have on the grant. And so I use that space. I also use my biosketch. So I make sure that everybody tailors their first part, the first paragraph, because if they don't tailor their biosketches, it shows that they're not really engaged in your project. If they aren't willing to spend 5 minutes editing their biosketch, why are they going to spend any time helping you with this project? Or did you give it to them too late and they didn't have time to edit it? Either way, it doesn't send a good sign to the reviewer if the biosketches are not edited and tailored to the grant. But I also use that as a time to show the publications that I've done with my team. So I make sure everybody on my team lists those publications so that so reviewers can clearly see that we've worked together as a team. Innovation. So that's your next section. Investigators is not a section. It used to be a section in grants, but that is really covered in the biosketches and the budget justification. Some people still put a section on investigators in the grant, but it takes up real estate that you might not have. So you have significant section. The next official section is called innovation. That is where you're showing them that what you're doing is moving the field forward. You're talking about something new, something that's going to have an impact. I think that this section should be short and punchy. I often use bullet points to help make the argument for why my grant is innovative, doing the work for the reviewer so that when they write the review, they got the points right there. If you just have an incremental push forward in the field, that doesn't usually excite people. If you're just saying, well, it's never been done in this population, so I'm going to do it in this population. That's my next point, is that usually isn't enough to make people excited about the innovation of your project. And when I say you should have foreshadowing in your significance. Remember those pieces of the argument. What's the problem? What's been done about the problem? What are the gaps in what's been done in about the problem? That gaps is your innovation. So you're already talking about what are the problems with the previous work and how you're filling them. That is your innovation argument. So by the time you get to innovation, you've already kind of talked about it in your significance section. So you don't need to belabor it. You're just kind of repeating for them and showing them in a nice punchy way why your grant is innovative. Okay, so approach, again, this is the biggest part of your grant, because you got to provide a lot of details to show them that you know what you're doing and you have thought this through and you picked out the best measures possible and you've thought about the best study design possible and you have a feasible plan for recruiting your participants if it's human participants. So spend a lot of time on your approach section because they will. I always start my approach section with design rationale. So no study design is perfect. There are almost always going to be alternate solutions to your study design or the measures that you chose or the population that you chose. And so I let them know my thinking at the very beginning of the approach section. Here are some design decisions and our rationales for them. Because what I don't want them to do is to read my approach and go, why'd she do that? That doesn't make any sense. By the time I get to explain it, they already have a little bit of doubt in their head about why am I doing what I'm doing. So I try to answer their questions before they have them. And so that's why I do a design rationale, like why did I choose the control group I did? Why do I have the endpoint that I do? Why do I have the, maybe the study population that I do? So those are the kinds of things that I put so that I'm trying to answer any questions that they might have before they have them. You definitely would need to show them that you have a feasible setting. You can recruit the people that you say. Any kind of data that you have that shows that feasibility of recruitment will help. You need to have solid and validated measures. You don't want to go in, especially with your primary outcome, with something that is not validated. You will get dinged for that, because remember, your study is only as good as your measures. So you could have the most amazing intervention, but if you're not assessing your effects in a valid and reliable way, you might as well not have done the study, because you can't even show the impact that you've had. And so they're really going to pay a lot of attention to your measures. You want to put in your reliability and your validity data as much as you can. Make sure you have an airtight recruitment method. Spell it out in detail. Show them that you have a track record. Your team has a track record in recruitment. And if you don't, make sure somebody on your team does, and highlight that. Make sure you describe the intervention well so they know what you're doing. And make sure that you have a well-justified sample size estimate. So this is a really tricky part. You have to figure out how many people you need to show an effect. So you need to know what you think your effect is going to be. But the problem is nobody's done the study that you are proposing to do. So you can't really know what your effect size is. You can kind of guess what it is based on past studies, but past studies aren't exactly your study, because if that were true, you wouldn't be innovative. So it's this really strange game of trying to say, I think I can find this effect, and that's why I need this many people, but you don't really know for sure. It's pretty much shooting in the dark, but you work with your statistician to come up with some justification for the sample size that you're picking, that's based on the literature. So they are going to be looking at 3 places for consistency. They're going to be looking at your aims. They're going to be looking at your measures, actually 4 places: your aims, your measures, your measurement or conceptual model, and your analyses. So if you have something in your aim, but it's not in your measures or your conceptual model or your analyses, they're going to go, what happened to that? Or if you have something in your measurement model, but it's not in your aims, they're going to say, where's that coming from? Or if you have a conceptual model, but then you don't measure something, they're going to say, why didn't you measure that? So the reviewers will literally go to all 4 of those places and see if you have the same things listed. So just make sure you don't have like these dangling measures or dangling constructs, or don't include them in the analysis section. So there's like, well, you're measuring this, but you haven't told me how you're analyzing it. So just really make sure that you've dotted all those I's and crossed all those T's. And I highly recommend including a conceptual model with almost any study that you do, that shows them that you have thought about how your constructs relate to each other. And if you're developing an intervention, how your intervention is impacting those constructs. So, and it should have some theory behind it. It's not just you thinking, I think it works like this. It just shows them your thought process. It shows them that you have a sense of what's happening and what you think will happen. And so that conceptual model is really important. And plus it's usually a picture, which speaks much more than words. And so having nice pictures in there for your tired reviewers will really help as well. So then the next section that they're looking at is environment. These are resource pages that are not in the page count, but make sure that you tailor them. I have gotten in trouble for having kind of generic resources pages. Make sure that your research page matches the work that you are proposing to do. And if you have letters of support that show partnerships or feasibility of recruitment, make sure that you differ your language in those letters of support, so that so for example, I had a grant where I was recruiting from 15 different clinics. Every one of those letters said something a little different. It was the same problem, it was the same grant, but I worded it differently. And I wrote those letters for those clinic leaders because they were not going to write them. They were just going to put them on their letterhead and sign them and maybe edit them some. But I just started them all off with different adjectives and a different way to describe the problem and different reasons why it was important for the clinic. And the reason that you do that is, again, you're saying I'm detail oriented, I'm hardworking, I don't cut corners. Because remember that your grant is speaking about you as a scientist. So you want to show them, I am diligent, I am hardworking, I'm not, I will do everything I need to do to make this project run well. Make sure that your folks put it on the correct letterhead and make sure they sign it. I know that sounds silly, but I've gotten letters back that are not on letterhead and are not signed, and you do not want to upload those letters because it looks like you just did it yourself, or that your partner isn't really on board because they didn't even take the time to do it right. I put a section in here that I haven't talked about before, and it's in case you are writing a career development grant. I have served as the chair of the F31, F32 study section for many years. We used to have a K club here at Duke. So I have helped many trainees write their career development sections. And if you are writing a career development award, this is the most heavily weighted section of your grant. The science does not carry as much weight as the career development section of your grant. And it is a hard section to write because we are not used to talking about ourselves. We are not used to telling our story. But a career development award is about you as an investigator, and it is about launching your career and helping you become an independent investigator. And so these sections trip scientists up because we are used to writing about, the literature review and the approach that we're going to use to address a question. But we aren't used to writing like, who are we and what do we know and what do we not know? But that is what you have to do for a career development award. So I always tell people, tell your story, whatever your story is. Don't keep pieces out if it's part of your story. So like I've mentored folks who their mother died when they were a junior faculty member. So there's a big gap in their publications. If you don't talk about that, they're going to wonder, why didn't you publish that year? What happened? So just be honest and transparent about who you are and your story and the path that you have, because your path is your path. And as you're writing that section about your personal statement, you are foreshadowing for them your career objectives. So you're talking about, I did this and I did this and I did this, but then I realized I need to know more about this, because I can't do what I need to do unless I know this. So by the time they get to your career objectives, they already know what they are, because you've already been telling them the story about who you are and where you're going and why you ended up where you are right now. And throughout that story, you've been highlighting sections or skills that you're lacking, that you're going to need this career development award to fill. Show your potential, but don't be too qualified. You don't want to be so qualified that you're too far beyond the career development award, but you also don't want to be so junior that you're not quite ready. So it's this really fine line of, I'm awesome, but I could be really, really awesome if I got this career development award. You can't be so far along that they think you should be writing an R grant, but you can't be so junior that they're wondering why you're writing it at that point. I recommend 3 to 4 career objectives, and no more than that. You'll be dinged most likely for being overambitious. You need to have one mentor for each career objective you have, because one person needs to be responsible and check the box that you achieved your career objective. You need to have clear metrics for achieving your objectives, and you need to have regular meetings with your mentors. So that's all I'm going to say about that section, but it is really important and gets weighed more heavily than the science of a career development grant. So this is just some tips on enhancing your scientific writing. Sell your idea. Remember, you are in sales. You are selling your science. So sell it, write persuasively. Don't go over the top. Don't be over flamboyant, but use persuasive words because it will be more compelling. Your subject and verb are friends. I took a really cool writing class when I was an assistant professor here at Duke, and it's amazing. And one of the things that I found out about my writing when I was early in my career is that my subject and my verb were really, really far apart in the sentence. And he taught me that my subject and verb needed to be really close together, because otherwise you say something and then you say a bunch of stuff in the middle, and your reader is like, I know somebody's doing something, but I don't know what they're doing. And they have to hold that until you finally get to the verb. So make sure that your subject and verb are close together so that they say, this person is doing this, if that makes sense. There is something called a stress position and a linking word. So at the end of your sentence, you are ending with a thought, and the very first part of your next sentence should link to that thought. And so a lot of times when I used to write, I didn't link my sentences together. It makes it a lot easier for the reader. Because remember, if your reviewer does not understand what you're doing, it is your fault and not their fault. You did not write it clearly. Maybe they're super, super tired, but in general, whenever I get a critique that says they didn't understand what I wrote, it is on me and not on them. So you can do this by making sure that you are linking your sentences together by having the last thought in that stress, what they call the stress position, link to the first part of the next sentence. That will make it easier for the reviewer to know what you're talking about and follow your argument. Use the active voice as opposed to the passive voice. The passive voice meaning participants will be recruited. Our study team will recruit participants. So the active voice, they are recruiting, will not be recruited. It takes more words to use the passive voice, and it makes the reviewer work harder because the passive voice is not a strong, they are not strong verbs, and it makes the reviewer have to work harder to know what you're doing. Preemptively answer the questions. I already talked about that. Toot your horn without blasting it. So you definitely want to learn to do some self-promotion without looking arrogant, which is not easy. So the do's: use consistent language throughout. So if you're saying clinician, don't say clinician and then physician and then provider and then oncologist, because it's going to confuse them. Use as many tables and figures as you can because it helps those tired reviewers know what you're doing and not have to work as hard. Use normal kerneling and spacing. So don't jam your lines so close together, because I can tell you reviewers have a visceral response. They go, when they see something that's making their eyes hurt. Present all of your pilot data. If your pilot data isn't great and you only present part of it, they're going to wonder what happened to the rest of it. And then it's going to make them question your integrity. So your data is your data. Don't try to hide it, because if you try to hide it, it actually can backfire. So just, it is what it is. Bold and italicize the last sentence of the section. Be clear about what your primary outcome is. Often you have one primary outcome, maybe two, but you have to be really clear on what that is, because that is the outcome on which you are powering your trial. And so you need to be really clear. What is the one thing that you would say determines the success or failure of your trial? And then end with summary sections. Here's an example of a grant that I wrote that got funded. You can see I did the bold and underline of each topic sentence. And remember, I was saying read each topic sentence to know that the argument's going well. And here is the italicize and bold, which takes your eyes away a little bit. The underlining actually draws your eye, but this is still bolded, so it still stands out from here, but it helps kind of close the loop on the paragraph. And then I had a nice figure here. Again, look at the spacing I'm using too. I'm trying not to have every sentence down here and crunched together. I tried to give some space to give the reviewer's eyes some break. So there's, sentences are ending in different places. I don't have them all. And I tend to not like the full justification because it creates weird spacing. And it also, I think, is harder on the eyes than having some white space here. So don't use unfamiliar acronyms. That can really tax our reviewers when you're using all these acronyms that you've made up, and it just makes them frustrated because they might not remember what they are. Or they might have started reading your grant one day and then had to go back to it another day, and then they can't remember what the acronyms are, and they'll get frustrated with you, and they might give you a worse score and they don't even know why. They're just frustrated with you. Do not cut and paste from your abstract. Write your aims page and your abstract should be different wording, because again, the message that you're sending is I'm hardworking enough that I'll take 5 minutes to write this differently. But if you cut and paste it, you're saying I'm not going to take the 5 minutes to write it differently. I'm going to take shortcuts, and that says something about you as a scientist. Put the key pieces in the human subjects section, and don't obviously overpad your budget. Obviously, they almost always cut your budget, but don't make it look like you're asking for money that you don't need. Don't assume that reviewers know the field, because many of them won't. So that you have to explain things as if they don't know it, and do your best to not have typos, because again, those typos tell them things about you that you don't want them to think. So phase 4 is assembling the grant. You've got all your bio sketches tailored and in the right format. They keep changing the format, so make sure that all your co-investigators are using the right format. And I have uploaded grants before, and not all the bio sketches have uploaded, so check them before you hit go. Check them and make sure everything's there. If you are proposing a clinical trial, you've got gobs of documents that you need to submit. And I know that NINR has done a great webinar on this. So you can go onto the PCRC website and look up that webinar and go through all of those fun documents that you need to include if it's a clinical trial. You need to include information about a data and safety monitoring plan if it's a trial. And if it's a high-risk trial, then you need to have a board, and then your letters of support. Make sure everything is there, because once you hit go and it's not there and you haven't checked it, you can't take it back. Cover letters are a little bit a thing of the past. I still tend to write them because I want the folks to know that I've talked to somebody in program and I put their name on there. So my program officers, I spoke with Dr. So-and-so. They think that this is a good fit for the National Cancer Institute. I've spoken with the scientific research officer of this study section. She thinks that this is the right fit. So let them know I've done my homework. Please assign it to this institute. Please assign it to this study section. Make sure all your pieces are there. Get a fresh set of eyes on it if you're bleary-eyed, and make sure you give yourself a couple days, because sometimes there are errors. And if you're submitting on the day it's due and there are errors, you're going to miss the window and you got to wait 4 months. So that is my talk. This is our prompt for our next webinar, which, oh my goodness, is going to be Dr. Nick Dion Odom, and he's going to be talking about introducing factorial design within the multi-phase optimization strategy, the Project Cascade exemplar. For those of you who don't know Nick, he's an exquisite speaker, so I highly recommend you register for this. And those are all my slides, but I think there are some questions in the Q&A.
There are questions, Kathryn. Thank you for an amazing presentation. That's just everything you would ever want and need to know about writing a grant, all in one place. So thank you so much for really terrific presentation. And there are 2 questions so far, and please feel free for those of you who are on the line to put your questions in the question and answer field. The first one is, how many years past dissertation is considered early career now?
That is a good, I thought it might be 7, but do you know, Christine? I don't know if I know the answer.
I do not. And in fact, it's one of those things that changes. And so I usually would check with your program within your institute, just to make sure that you're up to date on what that time frame is.
So could you provide some examples of metrics for achieving career objectives? For example, our courses in areas of knowledge or skill gap, a metric? Absolutely. So a lot of times when you have your, I actually recommend folks have a career objective table. So they have a lot, they have one column that's the career objective. The second column is the metric, and the third column is the mentor who is responsible. And so, the things that can go in there are coursework, conferences that you're attending, meetings that you're attending, like it could be your mentors' lab meetings, selected readings that they're going to have you do. And so, yes, those courses, and I would recommend it, depending on how long your K award is. If it's a 5-year award, no more than 4 courses, because you've already gotten a lot of training. You don't want to be super course heavy, because you got to do your science too. And so, and the courses are in the beginning part of your career objective, and then the science comes after. And so thank you for that question. Could you clarify about who you reference in the cover letter to avoid conflict? So thank you. The only people I put in the cover letter are the program official that I spoke with at whatever institute I want to consider funding my grant application. And the other person is the scientific review officer. So the person who is the person from CSR, which is the Center for Scientific Review, the person who is funded by NIH, not the scientists who are doing the review, not even the chair. You could talk about the chair, but because the chair is the chair of the study section, but I think the safest thing to do is talk about people who are funded by NIH, because those people aren't in conflict anyways, and they can't be in conflict. Thank you for that question.
And Kathryn, there's a question in the chat. Any
Yes.
advice on writing the innovation section?
Yes. So I thank you for that question. I make it a very, like I was saying, a very punchy section. So I started off by saying this project is innovative for several reasons. First, second, third. And again, remember, you've already built this case in your significance section. The innovation should not be a surprise based on what you've written already. And so, but sometimes I do it as bullet points, or sometimes I just have it, but I make sure it says first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and all of the innovative points, but I don't belabor them because I've already kind of been talking about them in the significance section of what the gaps are. Thank you for that question.
And I think that is it for the questions. So thank you so much, Kathryn, for an incredible presentation. And Naomi, any final comments before we adjourn?
Just a big thank you to Dr. Pollak and yourself, Dr. Ritchie. We were so gracious to have 2 representatives from the PCRC Executive Committee. And for all the attendees, we look forward to seeing you next month.
Wonderful. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, everybody.